Alright guys, let's talk about memory. Some of you guys have heard me talk about this before, hopefully all of you have. Let's see what we can get through tonight. What is memory? It is both the process of storing newly required information and for later recall, or recall of a specific experience or the total collection of our remembered experience stored in our brains. So it's the process of recalling something and the process of storing something. Now, the information processing model of memory has sensory, working or short-term memories, and long-term memories. There's also 3 memory processes. Encoding is the process of perceiving information, then categorizing and organizing it into a meaningful way that can be more easily stored and recalled. At this point, this is pretty much forming memories into short-term memory. Storage is a process by which encoded material is retained over time in memory. Retrieval is the process by which the information stored in memory is accessed. So if you encode something inappropriately, chances are you'll not be able to retrieve it very easily. So sensory memory is the first form of memory in the information processing model. Brief impressions from any of the senses are stored fleetingly, disappearing within a few seconds if they are not transferred to short-term memory. This could be anything that you're encountering at the moment. Short-term memory, on the other hand, is what you choose to pay attention to for the moment. This is immediate recollection of stimuli that have just been perceived. I show you a flashcard of something, or I mention a word, a phrase, or a phone number, for example. You're not going to remember it if you don't make it meaningful. Let's go pass from one ear out the other. Unless it's transferred to long-term memory, information in the memory system is usually retained only momentarily. Short-term memory and working memory are the same thing. Long-term memory is technically infinite. We store for periods of time from minutes to years, perhaps even indefinitely. Short-term memory is short duration. You have about 7 chunks of acoustically coded information, and it fades in about 20 seconds or less. Now, if you use active rehearsal, you're more likely to retain information in short-term memory. However, it's very easy to get distracted and lose whatever you're trying to put into your short-term memory or to pay attention to. It's very important that if you're trying to form new memories, that you try to do it without distraction. So if you want to increase the process of short-term memory, you can use chunking, which is the process of grouping items to longer, meaningful units to help make them easier to remember. For instance, you remember the letters if they form a word. So most information is placed in short-term memory in acoustic form according to how it sounds. This is how we help increase the limited capacity of short-term memory. Chunking is when you try to use things to make information more meaningful. For instance, 232 help. It's easier to remember 4 units of information rather than 7, which is a form of chunking. Roy G. Biv, another form of chunking. Long-term memory is infinite and limitless. However, if you want to form a new memory, or in addition to an old memory, you pull information out of long-term memory and edit it in your short-term memory. Short-term memory or working memory is a way to essentially work on the memory. Edit it, then put it back in long-term memory. So basically that is a way of editing new information. So long-term memory provides our historical perspective of who we are and allows us to understand and use the constant flow of new information we experience. This is how we're constantly allowed to grow and learn and change. There's 3 types of long-term memory: procedural, declarative, and episodic. Procedural memory is a lot of implicit memories. It's hard to lose them once you have them. This is recall for how to perform skills such as bicycle riding or swimming, how to get a certain place, things like that, all in procedural memory. Declarative memory on the other hand, has to do with recall for specific facts, such as information read in the book. Episodic memory has to do with autobiographical experiences or memories about one's own experience. When you had for breakfast, what movie you saw, and when you graduated high school. So procedural is how, declarative is what, and episodic is when, essentially. Eidetic imagery is a form of, it's also known as photographic memory, but it's kind of a misnomer. It's the ability to retain large amounts of visual material. This is very common, especially more common around children. Now, if you want to encode information into your long-term memory, you'd have to make the information meaningful. So you have mnemonic devices. These are memory systems such as clustering or acrostics that organizes material into a meaningful way to make it easier to remember. Clustering involves grouping items into categories, however that makes sense to you. Method of loci is forming pictorial associations between items you wish to recall in specific locations along designated route. This is commonly known, if you watch Sherlock, as the Mind Palace. Narrative story involves organizing information into a narrative. A form of an acrostic. An acrostic is sentences whose first letters serve as cues for recalling specific information. Favorite one is the lines for the treble clef. Every good boy does fine. EGBDF. And FACE is for the spaces. My very educated mother just served us nachos for the 8 planets. Acronyms are different from acrostics, as in, these are meaningful arrangements of letters that provide a cue for recalling information. This mostly has to do with names. Acrostics are good for sequences. There's maintenance rehearsal and elaborative rehearsal. Maintenance rehearsal is a system for remembering that involves using and repeatedly rehearsing information without attempting to find meaning in it. Remember how I described forming a long-term memory as in making something meaningful? Well, maintenance rehearsal doesn't do that. The idea is to strengthen the life of the short-term memory, not the long-term memory. Elaborative rehearsal involves summarizing, forming acrostics and mnemonic devices, and essentially making information meaningful. It's more effective than maintenance rehearsal. So if you want to make a textbook more meaningful to you, don't just read it right on the side of it. I swear that'll help you. Now, there's a difference between recall and recognition. Recall talks about your ability to reproduce information that you have previously been exposed to. Someone asks you to give a designated route. Just describe how you get there. Well, how do you remember how you get there? How you get to a certain place. Someone asks you for directions. But you have to recall that. You have to pull out a sequence of events. Recall also involves essay tests, papers, stories, things like that. Fill in the blank or essay questions are both examples of recall. Recognition involves the subject's ability to recognize whether he or she has been previously exposed to information, such as multiple choice and true-false questions. So recognition is more powerful than recall. And recognition involves multiple choice exams and true-false questions, because you're recognizing what is the correct answer versus having it come out of your head. And there's relearning and overlearning. Relearning is a study technique for testing memory that involves measuring how much more quickly a person can relearn material that was learned at a previous time. For example, this is when you're basically brushing up on something that you learned years ago. Overlearning involves memorizing material that involves rehearsing information that has already been learned. Overlearning is basically studying. So if you learn something but you're going over it again. Now let me explain the difference between explicit and implicit memory. Explicit memory are memories that you can recall through conscious effort. These are things that you try to learn. Implicit memory are memories that are unavailable to conscious awareness, but contribute to explicit memories. You close your eyes, you remember the outside of your house, what the color of the outside of your house is. Someone might ask you to give directions when you really don't know how to explain them at first. Implicit memory are things that you pick up. A lot of procedural memories are implicit, such as how to drive. Or, more specifically, and perhaps a better example, is how to type. I tell you to hit T on a keyboard, you might visualize it and hit it, but that'll be automatic to you. You may not try to remember where T is, or you might have to try to recall it, but it's still there. So implicit memory are memories that are unavailable to conscious awareness. Explicit memory are memories that you can recall through conscious effort. Very few people out there prepare to explain directions to someone. So many times directions to and from a place are formed via implicit memory. Now, false memory. This is fun. Memory essentially sucks. False memory is a memory of an event that never occurred. False memories can be planted in the subject prior to recall by a variety of methods, including hypnosis. Hypnosis is basically a state of enhanced relaxation, y'all. In the Loftus Lost in the Mall experiment, it took a teenager, a young man, told him about a time where he was lost in the mall when he was about 5. And his family told him a story about how a stranger helped him out. Asked, well, don't you remember the stranger? And despite the fact that this event never happened, the boy had invented a description of this stranger. Even though this is a man he never met or even came close to encountering. He came up with the idea because his brain automatically wanted to fill in the gaps. Schemas are a bit different. Schemas talk about how we have conceptual frameworks that we use to make out of stored information. This is different than false memory. These are basically how memories form. These are the mental structures we form to assimilate and organize process information. For instance, a child who had never seen a horse before would probably look at his mom and say, "Look, Mom, doggies." In truth, the Cherokee name for horse is just big dog. Horses are actually not native to America. I don't know if you knew that. But the baby would have a certain use to dogs. He might have certain characteristics he has associated with dogs, such as furry, tail, goes bark. So they have all these associative cues to aid recall because they have these different categories associated with a particular schema. Schema for a horse would be you have long mane, long tails, taller, eats grass. Now, the little boy in my little story would have to assimilate this new information and accommodate it into a new schema. So, instead of thinking horses and dogs are the same thing, he now registers horses and dogs as two separate things because of the comparison and traits that his mother gave him. No, sir. Little dogs don't have long tails and manes and things like that, and they don't go eat grass in the field. So the young man had to develop a new schema. We have schemas associated with all sorts of different things. I think the problem is when we have schemas associated with people. Okay, then there's the misinformation effect. It's a presentation of misleading information that leads people to erroneous reports of that misinformation. This is kind of like false memory. But in this case, since an eyewitness recall of a violent event may lack many details, he or she may be inclined to fill in the gaps with subsequent misinformation. In this case, if you have two groups together who witnessed a car wreck. You ask one group, how fast were the cars going when the cars contacted each other? And ask the other group, how fast were the cars going when the cars smashed into each other? Now the language between those two sentences are very different. But in truth, the people who asked how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other were going to estimate higher speeds, which is an example of leading the witness. It's very important to use unbiased language. Let's talk about state-dependent memory. To me, this is kind of weird to talk about because I've seen this happen. This is a phenomenon wherein a recall of a particular events, experiences, or information is aided by the subject being in the same context or physiological state in which the information was first encoded. In other words, if you study drunk, you probably should take the test drunk. Please don't ever come into my class drunk, you guys. That's not a good idea. If you are sleep deprived when you study for the test, you probably should be sleep deprived when you take it as well. It means you're more likely to remember more things that way. There's a reason why they ask you to give an eyewitness account of an accident right after it happens. Not just because it's fresh in your mind, but because you were in the same psychological state as when you watched it happen. The same could be applied to why we take tests in the same rooms when we learn the material, or why whenever we have a fight with a loved one, we remember every single time before that point where that person made us mad. This, in my opinion, is why arguments escalate. If you have a bad breakup, you probably might think of every other thing that person did to make you miserable. All examples of state-dependent memory. Flashbulb memory is apparent vivid recall of an event associated with extreme emotion or uniqueness, such as the assassination of a president or the bombing of Iraq, or 9/11. These memories may be triggered by any sudden, shocking events that has great personal significance to the individual. These memories are no more accurate than everyday memories. Forgetting is just as interesting to talk about. It could be caused by a decay of the memory trace. You can simply forget it through transience. If you don't use it, you lose it. Memories are like that. Problems with interfering material, either in short-term memory or long-term memory. Learning French and Spanish one after the other might cause you to confuse some vocabulary words. Or an old password, you might have problems remembering a new password because of the old password you're so used to using. You might have a breakdown in the retrieval process. It might have emotional and motivational conditions that might impede your memory of something. And neurological disorders is another one. Retroactive interference is when a later event interferes with the recall of earlier information. So let's say you get in a car crash, you might forget that you had to make your daughter's PTA meeting later on that night. Proactive interference is when earlier learning disrupts memory for later learning. In this case, if you have an old password, you might have problems remembering a new one. Now, the serial position effect talks about how we are more likely to remember things at the beginning and the end of a list without remembering things in the middle, because the things at the beginning and end are the ones that stand out. Now, there's two types of organic amnesia. This is memory deficits caused by altered physiology of the brain, which might result from an accident or a certain physical illness. There's retrograde amnesia, which is an inability to remember a certain point in your life, or remembering events that occurred prior to experiencing a brain trauma. Anterograde amnesia is memory loss for information processed after an individual experiences brain trauma caused by injury or chronic alcoholism. In other words, retrograde amnesia is when you cannot remember a certain time in your life. Anterograde amnesia is when you cannot form new memories. And this consolidation, this talks about the process by which information is transferred from short-term electrical activation of neuronal circuits to longer-term memory, coded by the physical cell changes in the brain. In other words, whenever you form a new long-term memory, your brain literally changes. Now, if you want to improve your memory, first thing you want to do is reduce the material to a manageable amount. You want to learn whole versus piecemeal learning. You want to use recitation to check recall. In other words, that's one of the reasons why I ask questions at the beginning of class. I want to check your recall. Overlearn, study. Learn it the first time and then learn it again. Make use of study breaks and rewards. Don't go in a place where you can burn yourself out. It doesn't affect your willingness, it also affects your brain. Avoid interference. Don't try to study when you're in the middle of a fight. Don't try to learn something new when you have a lot of distracting information in your brain. Manage your time. Don't put everything on your shoulders at once. Alright, you guys, I hope you have a good week and I wish you luck on the test. Bye-bye.